we go. So this verbena here, this dark purple one, you get in red and white and pink. That propagates softwood cuttings dead easy. And this bacopa is a particular favourite of mine. You might be familiar with the white variety, and the yellow one are really pretty common. I always find it difficult to get hold of this kind of mauvey lilac-y coloured one. So last year I decided that enough was enough, and I was going to take my own cuttings, and it works. This year I have planted up quite a few. Oh, can you see that one? Oh, don't forget this. Ooh, sorry, I'm trying to bring it around without breaking it.
Wow.
This is a fuchsia, and I didn't grow this from cuttings myself. I bought this several plants like this, but I particularly like this one. So this weekend I'm going to be taking cuttings off of this so that I can definitely have more of this plant for putting into my hanging basket next year. Fuchsias lend themselves beautifully to this activity that we're going to talk about. So I've mentioned it saves you a lot of money if you can take your own cuttings from particular plants like these. These are all known as tender perennials. They're sold as annual bedding plants because they survive our Scottish summers beautifully. Come the autumn time when the temperatures start to drop, these plants just kind of like give up the ghost because they're not native to our country. They have to have warmer climate all year round. But if you take softwood cuttings and overwinter them indoors in a frost-free, I just keep them in my garden pot actually, and I cover them over with a fleece, and that seems to keep them warm enough. So they're frost-free and they do fine. So that's your tender perennial that I'm talking about taking cuttings from. Some of your popular garden shrubs, you can take softwood cuttings from them as well, but I would suggest you do that earlier on in the summer than doing it just now. But just now is definitely okay for your bacopas, your verbena, your fuchsias, and the geraniums, which I'm going to be looking at in more detail once I move over to the end table. So it saves us money. I'll let you have a look at my basket. So it saves us money, and the other benefits that we can get from doing this type of activity is exercise. You know, I brought this basket indoors to let you guys see it, and there will be plant groups out there that we can't take outside to the garden to select our own plants. But if you've got a lovely big container or a big basket like what I've got here, two of you could easily bring it in and set it up on a table, and people could take the cuttings from the actual mother plant in the basket like so. So a walk around the garden would introduce some exercise to the activity and collecting the plant material. But again, depending on your plant group, you would have to sort of pre-walk the route to make sure that it's accessible for your clients and that there are suitable plants to actually choose from once you've got to the end of your walk. You can make it more demanding by bending and have to reach to the plant to take the cuttings and then carrying the bag back or the trunk, whatever you're carrying them in, or make it less demanding by having identified plants that are at waist height or at growth height that the person could cut at a level more suitable to them without being too demanding on them. The walk itself can be a calming, restorative activity. There's nothing nicer than just walking around the garden, in my mind. Just seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, all enabling stress reduction for many folks. And if this was done as a group activity, this would meet social inclusion outcomes, just enjoying working, being part of a team. Once we get to actually doing the demo, you'll see that working with the cut plant material would support the use of fine motor skills, and of course, pride, self-worth, and seeing the task completed. And Jenny will agree. I think that I was like dead pleased with my hanging basket. So I'm full of pride for my hanging basket and the cuttings that I took myself last year. And of course, this activity can generate several extension activities also, such as making your own plant labels for popping into little pots once we've taken the cuttings. And because they're going to have to be cared for all winter long, It gives meaningful and purposeful activity as we go into the slower autumn winter months. Okay, so that's a wee bit of chat about why we're doing this. I'm going to move over, Jenny, now to the demo table and actually start doing some stuff. At my lovely demo table, the plants that I'm going to be using are geraniums. I've got my, in fact, I'm just going to show you this just because. That first purple plant I showed you in my hanging basket was the purple verbena. Now, when I was bringing it in and manhandling it on top of my desk there, I snapped a little bit off because it's quite a brittle plant. The stems are quite brittle. So you can see I've snapped it off and it's got a little flower coming, but I stuck it in what do you call it, a plastic glass of water to keep it nice and fresh, because, and it made me run outside to bring these in just to show you, these are the same plants that I snapped off by accident when I was deadheading maybe about 6 weeks ago, and I just quite literally stuck them in some compost, and you can actually see how quickly they've rooted round about. That's how easy softwood cuttings are, okay? So I just wanted to show you that this little broken bit of plant is going to go into a bit of compost later on so that I can get another plant out of it. Okay, the plants I really want to talk about are the geraniums. Geraniums they're also known as pelargoniums. They're kind of, I did a wee bit of Googling in to find out what's the true difference between a geranium and a pelargonium. And the long and short of it is a pelargonium is an indoor geranium, like these three that I've got sitting here, this red one as well. And a geranium is the proper name given to the perennial geraniums that are outside in your garden that live there all year round. They die down in the winter time. There's not much to see. They pop back up the next summer and they put on lovely pinks and mauve coloured flowers and some white ones as well. But pelargonium geraniums, people use the words under the description, the names interchangeably. So this is a scented geranium and it is really quite pungent. I like it. And it's got lovely variegated kind of lime green leaves and these dinky little white flowers. These lend themselves beautifully to softwood cuttings. And then we get the bigger leaved ones. You get them in shades of red and pink and white. I'm going to use this particular plant here to take my the cuttings from. So when you're collecting the plant material, the cuttings that we're going to be taking from the plant, collect early in the day if you can. This is because the plant stems are turgid, and turgid is just another fancy word that means full of moisture, and they're full of that, they're nice and stout and sturdy, and they will survive the kind of stressful experience for them of being cut off the parent plant and then manhandled and shoved into a little pot and been told to look after themselves. If you can't collect them in the morning and it's maybe more convenient for you to do it later on in the day, keep them in a poly bag in a fridge overnight and then use them the following day, or if you collect them in lunchtime and you're not doing the activity till 3 o'clock, pop them in the fridge and that'll keep them nice and fresh, because it's amazing how quickly they do wilt and just really increasing the chances of them not rooting round is what we want them to do. So you're choosing healthy plants, plants that have got no obvious signs of disease, plants that have got nice healthy looking leaves on them. This plant is producing flowers, so it looks pretty healthy to me. And as I say, I'm using these geraniums, pelargoniums, because they're very popular. They're easily found in your garden or in your next door neighbour's garden. And even the garden centres have got these plants all year round because they're commonly sold as house plants also. So that's your plant material. The compost that I'm going to use is a compost that is designed for young plants, and it's mixed 50-50 with perlite. Now you don't have to use perlite. This, the verbena that I talked about, that I just stuck in some compost, it doesn't have any perlite in it because I quite literally shoved it in a pot. But perlite is readily available online or in garden centres, and this is what the bag would look like if you were looking for it. Perlite helps aeration in the compost. There's lots of air trapped in the compost that enables better root development, and also it helps with drainage and makes sure that there's not too much water in there, which would ultimately rot the young plant's roots if it got too wet. So I've just mixed the compost and the perlite roughly 50-50. If you don't have perlite and you've got something like some fine grit, you could mix that through. That would do the same job also. Now this is one of my favourite jobs, just mixing this together. So if you're working with a group of people, you know, maybe this is a job that somebody can be working away at, mixing the compost together with the perlite. It's nice and tactile, and we're just breaking up any cloggy bits. The compost for young plants tends not to have any big clunky bits in it anyway, but break it all up. Just imagine if you were a wee person living in a pot of compost, you would like to have a nice soft bed of compost, not clunky cloggy bits. So that's my compost. I need to have some water because it's important that the young plant gets lots of water from the get-go, because you've just taken it away from its mum and it's not too happy about it. We need some plastic pots. These are just 9cm pots that I probably bought some plants in earlier on the year that I'll reuse. And I've got scissors for taking cuttings with. Lots of websites recommend the use of a knife, which I might use later. It depends what I end up doing. Knives are quite sharp, though, very sharp I should say, and maybe not be suitable for your client group. But because the types of plants we're using and it's softwood cuttings, generally the stems are quite soft. So I probably will just use the scissors for the demonstration, but you could use safety scissors because, as I say, the material that we're working with isn't so heavy and hard that these scissors shouldn't be able to cut through it. So that's my scissors, 9cm pots, labels and pens, because with the best will in the world you'll forget what colour of geranium it was. Was it the red geranium I put there, or was it the white one? And you'll never know until they start to flower which ones they actually were. So always get into the habit of writing. You don't have to know the fancy name or anything like that. Just write down the plant description as you remember it. That will trigger a memory for you. Last thing I've got here is rooting powder. Let's see, it just like very fine. Actually looks like one of the spices, but it's not a spice. It's not for cooking. This rooting powder, it's a root stimulating hormone, excuse me, which can increase the chance of successful new plant roots developing, like these softwood cuttings. But for the geraniums, you definitely don't need to worry about using that. I've got it, and if I'm perfectly honest, I keep on forgetting to use it. But I brought it out just to let you see that it is available. So, excuse me. First thing I'm going to do is prepare some pots. Just have them all lined up at the side here. Again, perhaps you could make a conveyor belt out of it. Some folks could be doing this. Just filling them almost full and then settling them down just to knock out any excess big air holes in in the compost there. And now for taking the material from the plant. We're looking for a stem that's about 10 centimetres long, preferably, and one that doesn't have a flower on it. Now, I kept these flowers on this plant just so that you could see that it was a nice pink geranium, and it might help you recognise the actual plant. So, I'm wondering if you can see this okay. I'm going to move my pencil out of the way. I'm going to take this stem in here. It's nice and straight. It's got lots of nice growth at the top. It's got a bud forming, but I'm going to not worry about too much about that. And you can see where the stem comes away from a cluster of leaves that are growing here. So I'm going to cut that one off. Just above where the set of leaves are. Clean cut. And then this part of the plant will put all this energy into making these wee leaves that I've left here into growing, and I've not done the plant any harm. It'll just divert more energy to developing this part of it. So we don't want the flower bud because that's taking up far too much energy. So I'm just going to snap that off. I'm going to snap off the lower leaves. I'm going to leave these two leaves here. And this central piece here, like the top growth, I'm going to nip that out as well, just with my fingers. But you could use your little scissors if that was easier. Get these two bits off. And that is my softwood cutting. Now, this is a stem, but plants are really clever things. They're far more clever than what we'll ever be, I think. Where I've just snapped those leaves off, there's lots of hormones floating about in here, and the plant is really clever. It is now going to convert the cells in the stem into root-making cells. How it can do it, I'm not a botanist, so I can't explain that to you. I'm really sorry. Please don't ask me a question on that, okay? Because I won't, I'll have to refer you somewhere else. But trust me, that's how it works, and it does work. It's incredible. So I've now got my stem cutting, and I'm just going to take my pot, and I'm just going to slide it down the side of the pot. So it's almost touching the edge of this pot. I'm going to push it down just till we get out where the leaves were sitting. And these two leaves are proud of the compost. And that's my first one in. Let's get another one. Okay, here's another one in here. I'm just going to cut off this flower stem because it's in the way. No other reason. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger, so I'm going to cut further down to where it's breaking away from other leaves down below. There. I'm going to take away the bottom leaves. All these bottom leaves are just going to be in the way. I can't have them going down into the compost because they would then rot inside the compost, and it would just cause problems, and it would start to rot the plant the whole way up from the bottom of the stem up to the top, and it wouldn't root round about. So here is another flower bud forming. So it's going to get taken off out the way. I'm going to take this leaf off. And we can see several wee new growth areas at the top. I'm just nipping them out. Again, a fancy word called apical dominance. The plant wants to put all its growth into growing up the way, and it makes all these new wee shoots reaching for the stars, but we don't want these particular bits growing upwards and outward. We want it to grow outwards as well as upwards. So if we cut out the top growing bits, it sends a wee message back down the way to these leaves and further down saying, oh gosh, just cut off my head, let's make more arms. And it will grow into a much more rounded, bushier, sturdier plant, which then can grow upwards for the height. So I think this is a pretty neat looking cutting again. It's a little bit longer than what I would hope for, so I'm just going to cut it down size a little bit. Same thing. Slide it round to the side, push it down, but I'm not going to have any of the leaves or the leaf stems inside the compost itself. Now, I'm only going to put 2 in here because these are big leaves, but with other ones, that I did earlier, these ones were taken on the 20th of June. I took these cuttings. Smaller leaf geranium. And you can see that was what, 7 weeks ago, and you can see how well rooted down they've started to come, and they've got lots of space. And I'm going to put these on in a little minute just to show you what to do at the next stage. Excuse me. Okay, so we must label. So this is, I'm just going to call this pink geranium because I don't know its proper name. I've only got one pink geranium, and I'm going to write today's date, 18. Pop it down the side so remember where it is. Going to set it on a tray that's got no drainage holes in the bottom of it. And I'm going to give it a right good scoosh. Try and avoid watering over the leaves if you can. And the water will drain down through the compost onto this tray. I'm going to monitor and make sure the compost is kept damp, not moist, not wet, but like sand, if that makes sense to you. When you pick up a scoopful of sand, it's not soggy wet, it's damp. And from now on, I'm going to water into the tray so that the compost takes the water up from below, and that also encourages the roots to develop downwards and outwards to find that water. And that is your softwood cuttings. I brought in some, I just ran out and grabbed some penstemon cuttings. And I've got some with flowers on them. You're not, if you can, don't choose the ones that get flowers. You're going to choose ones like these that have no flowers and they're nice and floppy. Another way of working out what is a good part of the plant to take a softwood cutting from is by touch. So anybody with poorer eyesight, this might be a good way of introducing the notion and activity to them. The older material is a darker colour to begin with. But if you run your fingers up it, you can feel where it's really woody, and I could snap it. And then as you start to run your fingers up it, it gets more bendy. Couldn't snap it, I would really have to bend it and tear it until it gets to the point where I can actually bend it back into itself, wrap it around my finger, and I couldn't bend it or snap it. This is the new growth. This is the part that is ideal for taking a softwood cutting. So in this plant here, just where it changes from being kind of bendy to being really bendy, is where I'm going to take my cutting. It's so high, just pulling off the bottom leaves. And I've left with a rather sad looking cutting, but a nice healthy sad looking cutting. Penstemon I would dip into rooting hormone. When I say dip, I mean just quite literally dip it in. That's it. Same thing. Slide it down the side, quite far down, making sure that none of the leaves are actually making their way into the compost. Water it, label it. Now, some plants like a little bit of extra help for germination. Sorry, not for germination, for root development. And penstemon is one of them. And what you can do is take a polythene bag. This is a freezer bag. And once you've watered it, so imagine this has been well watered, you can cover it over with your plastic freezer bag, secure it with string or an elastic band, sit it on the tray and water from the bottom up. But depending on how warm it is, you might not need to have to water it because the greenhouse effect will be creating condensation in there, so there's not the same evaporation of water. If it gets very condensated, every other day, take the little greenhouse plastic bag off of it, shake the bag out to get rid of the excess water, then tie it back on. When you see roots starting to develop out the bottom, like, that's not clear enough, you won't see that one. She says trying to find roots to show you, sorry. Yeah, these roots are a wee bit more established because this was a penstemon cutting that I took in the very early stages of this year. So it's very well rooted down now, but you can see the roots starting to come out. Once you see the roots developing, take the greenhouse cover off then. So, penstemon is good for softwood cuttings, as are the geraniums that I've spoken about, and the verbena that was in my hanging basket, and the purple bacopa, all lend themselves beautifully to this type of cutting. So, what to do once they have rooted round about? These are the ones that I showed you a little while ago that I did on the, I can't even remember the date that I said to you now. See, this is why I have to write dates down. 20th of June. And we've got nice root system developing. The 3 plants that I've put in are nicely developing. It's time now for them to live in their own little pot. And I'm just gently tearing them apart, doing my best to keep as much compost round about the root as possible. I'll just empty that back out. Same compost, young plants mixed with perlite. Again, if you don't have the perlite, don't worry too much about it. I'm just going to maybe not put as much in as that. Wiggle a little hole, or you could use a spoon for scooping in your compost, making your hole. And I'm very gently, just quite literally going to place that in the little hole, add some more compost round about it to firm the plant in. New label, because it's a new date on it. I need to see what this one was. This was my ivy leaf red and white geranium. Today's date. Put it on its tray. Give it a good water. And this plant will now stay in this particular pot all winter. I won't be potting it on anymore. By next March, I will either pot it on into a bigger pot or I'll start putting it into hanging baskets, but I won't be actually putting the hanging basket outside until I know all frosts have passed, because pelargoniums, geraniums are tender perennials. They need to be protected from frost in the winter time. And that's you at stage 2 of potting on your softwood cutting geranium. Last thing I want to show you is the little plant that we're going to be sending out to you. This is Pelargonium cola bottles. Now, you can't smell it, but when you rub the leaves, it gives off the perfume of, if you're old enough, you'll remember the gummy, jelly, sweetie cola bottles that you get. Not the cola cubes, not the, you know, those red things that we get. Not them, but the actual cola bottles. And it really does smell of cola bottles. And it's a nice crinkly leaf. It's a really interesting plant. Invigorates many, many senses. And these are the plants that we're going to be sending out. Now, if you can't take the cuttings from it just now for whatever reason, I would suggest you pot it onto the next size of pot up. And I'll put in a couple of these little pots here, which you could pot this plant into this pot, which is slightly bigger. You can run your finger all the way around about it, which is a good indication of the next size of pot you should be potting a plant onto. Never overpot a plant. Don't say, oh, it'll be great, it'll be in there for 3 years, I'll not have to pot it on again. That's not good for the plant. It's having too much water available to it, it's got too much nutrients in the compost, and it's actually not, the plant could well die actually. So always just pot it up one pot size. But if you are taking cuttings, something like this one here. You can see this okay?
Yep.
I would take the cutting just about here. You're leaving all these little leaves down the bottom that will continue to grow on the parent plant. And meanwhile, you've taken this stem off, and I would take off those leaves, that new little bit of growth there, cut out the centre growth piece that's growing at the top here, cut it down a size slightly, and that would be my first cutting from this plant. There's another one there, so that's 2. I'll cut in about there, take off those lower leaves, central growing point, 1, 2, there you go, there's your third one in there. So this one will generate 3 softwood cuttings, plus you're left with the parent plant. I would then pot the parent plant into this slightly bigger pot, and because it needs a wee bit of a boost, having made these she babies and had them cut off from it. And that, I think, Jenny, is my how to do softwood cuttings. Oh, one last thing, sorry. Deadhead, wait till I show you. I did have one. These are young plants that are growing. Take off any kind of brown leaves that are developing, and this one's desperate to make little flowers. This is the red and white ivy leaf geranium. Pinch these out. We don't want it making flowers at the moment. We want it to put on nice green growth and continue to develop and make a good root system. So don't be tempted to let it make little, let it flower, let it continue to develop its buds into flowers. It's just diverting all its energies there at the expense of the general health and robustness of the plant. So always take those buds off until you want them to actually make flowers that you're going to benefit from next spring, summertime. Thank you, Jenny.
Oh, fantastic, Jo, and thank you so much. Loads and loads of good information there and inspiration for us. Fantastic.
Now I'm just going to try and leave you here.
Okay, I'll move the spotlight and let you get back over to the table. Lovely. Okay, oh, I'm just going to spotlight you here. That's great.
Right.
Thank you so much. Now, some questions have come in from our audience today, and the first one, I think, is...
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great. The first question is, could you tell us what the name of the small purple flower Anna asks. So I think it's the small purple flower on your basket. Is it
Okay.
this
Well,
one?
I'll do both of them. This one is the verbena, verbena, verbena. You get it in purple, red, white, pink, huge selection of colours in the verbena. And this one here, the paler purple, kind of lilac-y mauve one, is Bacopa, Bacopa, Bacopa.
Excellent.
And if you're lucky, you know, if you go into some of the garden centres, I know one or two round about me, they've got the tail end of their summer bedding. I mean, like the plants are a wee bit ropey. You might get them for next to nothing or even free, but you might get one or two little cuttings off of them. And that actually got two fabulous plants in the making for next year.
Fabulous. Okay. That's great. Now, another question about flowers. The cola bottles plant that you're going to be sending out, does that produce flowers or is it just a scented geranium?
No, it produces little little dainty little flowers, little purple flowers, not dissimilar to the mauve of the Bacopa. So it does, but they're tiny little flowers compared to like those big pink, cerise pink ones that we've seen in the geranium there.
Terrific. And can I just ask a question, because I missed it at the beginning when you were doing your introduction. When in the year is best to take your cuttings?
Oh, softwood cuttings, the one that I've just demonstrated, anytime from mid to late spring through to the tail end of summer. So this is us at the tail end of summer, okay? But because I'm talking about these particular types of plants, these will take absolutely fine just now. If you're wanting to take softwood cuttings from things like the penstemon that I showed there, I don't know if that'll take now because it's a wee bit late on in the year for it. I would do them earlier on, but do that touch test, you know, when you've got enough growth, about 10 centimetres long of bendy, floppy growth, that's you've got enough material to take a softwood cutting from.
Fabulous. Okay, well, Lorna says that's been brilliant, and she's definitely going to have a go. She's never been taking cuttings, but she's going to have another try. And Carolyn said, thanks for recommending the water bottle, which she'd seen on a previous live Zoom from Trellis. And now some of her residents that are able to water their own can water their own plants. So that's
brilliant, excellent.
Lovely to hear, isn't it? That's great. Margaret asks, why do we put the cuttings at the edge of the pot? Is there a reason for that?
Okay, now Margaret, I knew somebody was going to ask me that, and I thought, why do I do that? So I thought, I remember being taught it at college, but I couldn't remember the theory behind it, and I've always done it. So I went on to Gardener's World as my go-to for absolutely everything. So I went on to Gardener's World, and yep, they all say, well, they don't all say, but enough of them say slide the cutting down the edge of the pot, or they demonstrate it in the little videos, but they don't tell me why. So I started to like really rack my brains as if I was sitting in an exam. To remember that one piece of information that you had to write down to get full marks. And I think it's to do with when you're watering, the water for some reason goes to the edge of the pots, and the cutting is getting a sort of drip feed of water the whole time down to it if it's at the side, as opposed to being in the centre of the pot. So that is not a horticultural answer. That is the Joan Wilson take on why you put cuttings down the side of a pot.
Brilliant. Well, answers on a postcard, please. If anyone's got any other suggestions as to why we might put them on the side of the pots, that's brilliant. I think that's all our questions, unless anyone's got anything else they want to throw into the chat quickly just now. But I think you covered everything. I was about to ask you, how do you tease these plants apart? But you said you went on to demonstrate exactly how to do that. So that was brilliant. Totally answered all my questions I had. I don't see anything else coming through. Oh, here we go. Here we go. What other shrubs would be good to take cuttings from?
Okay, see things like your spring flowering shrubs, things like, oh gosh, as I look outside to the garden to get inspiration, cistus,
we sort of pink and white flowers on cistus, Philadelphus, spireas. Oh, you're kind of like, I don't mean run of the mill. If they're flowering in the springtime, then they're putting on lots of fresh growth early on in the year, and that's ideal for taking your softwood cuttings from. So again, if in doubt, if you've got something soft and floppy that you can kind of bend, have a go at it. You're not going to, you've not got much to lose.
Lovely. And Anna's asking a question about overwintering and about the light levels in overwintering.
Okay.
Any tips?
Yeah, in the winter time, all these plants go into a dormant phase. They're still there, we can see them, but you'll find that their roots don't really develop much more, and they won't put on much more growth unless you've got them in an indoor windowsill, like a living room or somewhere like that, where the geraniums will grow like billios, so they will. But I don't take mine indoors. Mine's away outside in the hut here all winter. That's where I kept them last year. They're at a big window. I've got a big window in the hut here, so they are getting as much daylight as our winter allows. And I do cover them with a fleece, just a layer of horticultural fleece in the winter time. If I know the temperatures are going to go down from about 2 degrees or lower, I just tuck them up for the night.
Sounds nice and cozy. Lovely. Well, I think that's all our questions, Joan.
Great.
Thank you very much indeed.